Hey, everybody, it's Barb Egan with Therapy Talks. And on today's show, we also have,
Hi, it's Hailey. Welcome to Join Barb. Today, we're going to have a conversation around is therapy for me?
yes, we're going to demystify what does therapy look like? How do you get started? How do you find a therapist? What do you talk about in session? We really just demystify this whole process and find out maybe therapy could be right for you.
Well, hello, Barb. I'm happy to see you again. And I thought it'd be a great time today to maybe get back to the basics and talk about why should someone or a couple or a family attend therapy and what happens in that counseling hour and really just have some time today to change maybe some of the stigmas that are still really existing around what is counseling, what goes on in that hour, what's available within the hour, those kinds of things.
Yeah, such great topics, like demystifying it. Absolutely. Because I think, my perspective on it is we're all human, we all have stuff. So I think we could all benefit from counseling and a trained, mental health professional and just taking care of our mental health.
Totally. And I don't know about you, but sometimes in society, there's this little bit of nasty vibe to that person's struggling. So go get help. You know what I mean? And they say it almost in an unhelpful tone or way. And that help becomes now no longer a pleasant thing or a good thing. It becomes almost like a punishment.
Yeah, totally. I was talking to a young girl today and she said those exact words. It took so long, early 20s to reach out and say to someone close to her, I'm kind of struggling. I think I need to reach out for help. And that takes a lot of guts. That's a lot of, time in the making. It doesn't just come out. And then she just felt that that person that she tried to open up to used it against her and was like, you need medication, you need help, and in a negative, derogatory, condescending way, where the reality is we probably all need help at some point or the other, at some point in our lives. And that's okay. That's actually a huge sign of strength.
Yeah, exactly. Turning it towards the strength instead of a weakness, right?
Yeah.
Instead of you are less than if you need some support, right? Because there's this, I don't know, this undiscussed kind of idea that you should be able to manage your well being. You should be able to go to work. You should be able to manage your relationships. You should not explode with emotions at a moment's notice. That's something that you should just have. And I think it even goes back to this idea that, oh, you should have learned that during childhood. You should have been parented and had proper attachment figures. And that should have just been ironed out. And so then when we get into adolescents and teenagers and young adult, we have that still that unhelpful idea that, oh, maybe everyone's the same. We all have had loving childhoods. So if you don't respond in a helpful way, go get help, right? Let's punish you with that, catch up already.
Right. Yeah. The catch up mentality, or what's wrong with you that you don't have this skill. And that's not true. Like, most of us grew up in homes that maybe emotions, we didn't even know how to identify them, or to talk about them. And that's kind of unfolding more and more, becoming more normalized or lessening a stigma to an extent, but it's still there. And we're human. Nobody does it perfectly.
And I think one of our natural human tendencies is to be in groups and tribes. And if someone doesn't quite fit in, we almost see it as dead weight, go push them aside, go push them away from the collective whole, instead of going, hey, wow, you're vocalizing that maybe you need some support. Let's honor that. Let's support you in that. Let's have that community of growth and joining together.
And it's so hard too. I remember I was 15 when I saw my first counselor, and really, I probably should have done it earlier. I moved almost every year of my life, like so much instability, always being the new kid, especially during middle school. That's terrible. But it wasn't normal. And I come from a big sports family. I was a big, time athlete, in that world where that's a sign of weakness. Like, nobody even worked on the mental performance side of things or the sports psychology. Like, my grandfather was a pro Hall of Fame baseball player. Like, it was just not heard of. We just, that kind of suck it up mentality was there. Like, what's wrong with you? Don't show weakness. And I moved away at 15 for hockey, and I, lived on my own and played at this, special hockey boarding school in Minnesota where Sidney Crosby played and all of that. So all the pressure. And my parents moved, my dad lost his job. I'm 15 years old. I think like my boyfriend cheated on me or something, like just the normal teenage drama. And I caved. That's what I told myself in my mind. I'm like, I'm just going to go talk to our guidance counselor. I'm not going to tell anybody. And it was like this little secret that I was like, I just want some help, but I'm so scared to ask for it. And that person, I still talk to her in my life still today, like all these years later. She was so influential. She was so non-judgmental, loving, safe. And that really was my first experience with therapy. And then from then on, I pretty much have been consistently, either personally or professionally involved in it. But again, at 15 back then, that was kind of not normal. And I hear these kids, I was speaking at a high school 2 weeks ago, and they were asking the best questions. They were talking about therapy and mental health in such normalized ways. And I was blown away. I was kind of thinking, I'm going to go in there. We've just survived 2 years of a pandemic. They're going to be really hurting. And to some extent, that's true for all of us in some ways. But I was really blown away at how normal they made mental health care and how they talked about it. It was awesome.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like it was just so impactful for you, and to have that relationship with that guiding counselor for so long, right? But what some like so may if I may ask, what gave you that freedom to go, I'm going to go and speak, even if I have to keep it at like to myself, which you are welcome to do, everyone. Like if you want to seek help and you don't want to share that, that's fine. You don't have to. There's no one, that's the wonderful nature of confidential therapy. But for you, like what do you feel like was that little bit of step forward for you that pushed you?
Well, I think it was a combination of, life things and the pressure. And again, I went to like this very prestigious school, like ambassadors' kids were there. We were national champions back to back to back. Most of the players went on to the NHL or Team USA in the Olympics. Like it was just pressure all the time, like high academics. And I just felt like I was living this lie. Like here, I am my parent, like my dad lost his job. I just had that nagging voice in my head. I don't belong. I don't belong here. And I was young. I was very good at hockey, and hockey was like my whole identity. And I had an injury. And then from there, I was like, who am I? Can I get back? Am I going to lose my scholarship? All of that. It felt at the time my whole world in every sense was crashing down, and I didn't know who to turn to. And I just really, it was just that our guidance counselor, who was a trained therapist, but again, really helped us with school decisions more so like that. And I just remember she was just so nice. Like she would smile at me in the hallway. And really, it was just that. And her office was kind of tucked away by the nurses area and the bathrooms. And so I thought, okay, I could sneak in there and I thought about it a lot first before I ever went. I could sneak in there. Nobody would know. Like they would think I'm, at the nurse or going to the bathroom or something. And that's kind of how it started for me, that it was just like a lot of little things piling up. And I told myself, I can get through this. I didn't know anybody at that time who went to counseling, or at least that talked about it. And it was just a thought that I kept coming back to and thought, okay, at this point, I've tried to do what I've been doing and it's not helping. I got to change it up.
Mm-hmm. So that welcome smile, right?
Yes.
That needing for change, and just kind of really like feeling like you were squeezed so tight that you needed an out and you needed a place where you could feel respected and heard and validated. So that's really wonderful. And I think like with a general population, like that's what counseling is for. It doesn't mean that you have to go to counseling for this big one incident thing or this, it can be anything. And you're all like, the goal of it is to feel heard and validated and supported no matter what you're working on. I think that like within a counseling hour, I've helped clients make a budget. I've gotten out the Excel sheet. That's one of their main stressors. Or I've helped practice like job interviews with clients because they're wanting to move forward with their job, or relationship challenges, or honestly, it can be really anything. Not necessarily every counselor is going to meet everything that you're struggling with, because we all have our different areas of competencies. But I think that's a huge thing that needs to be acknowledged, is like, it's flexible. Anything can be discussed in counseling and nothing is really off limits.
Yeah, totally. And I think, the more in the last few years in particular. And I see that on people's intake. So when people are exploring counseling, you don't need a doctor's referral. You can self-refer, you can find your counselor. But I have a system called JNAP, and there's an intake form that people can kind of say in as little or as much detail as they want. What are some of your goals of counseling? Like, why are you coming? What has inspired counseling now for you? And what would you like to work through? What would be a goal? And so often, the more and more that I'm seeing is, I don't know exactly, but I know it's good for me. I don't know exactly, but I want to take care of my mental health. And it is like, that's really cool. I've only seen that in the last 2 out of, the 13 years. And I love that, because it's like, okay, yeah, we wouldn't just, go to the dentist once in our life. We would want to kind of be on top, even if it's just twice a year, but to check in on your, your overall dental health or gum health. The same is true for mental health. Sometimes we go through seasons where there is something, an event or a big experience or a time in your life that you are getting squeezed, and you need, that consistency or that season of counseling, but not really. For most of us, we don't need to go every week for the rest of our life. And it can go in seasons, or it looks so unique to different people, check-ins, or maybe there is something that you are really working through that takes a little bit more effort, especially early on in that consistency.
Yeah, definitely. Because it gives you that opportunity to build resiliency. So as the resiliency is built, you might be able to step back, attend less sessions, you might be able to take a pause and return to it later. Like, I tell people that part of the goal is actually for me not to see you eventually, so that you feel so empowered to be able to have that independence. And if we don't meet that goal, that doesn't mean we failed at that goal, or it's a pass fail system. It's more like, wow, like you feel like you've developed enough resourcing and be able to empower yourself to manage whatever comes your way, but also still feel accepted if you want to return back to having some support.
Totally. I have some people return just to share their victories. And I'm like, I love that. What a fun session. And it's so good because, like a GP or a family doctor, we don't just need to see you when your world's crashing down or you're not doing well, or like for a doctor, when you broke your leg or not, your health isn't well. It's sometimes good to see what your baseline is, like who you're really created to be, and to, really call that out in you and encourage you in that. And it's so beautiful. Or even just little email updates or things like that, because it's a unique relationship, a therapist and a client, that there is this confidentiality, unless, there's imminent harm to the client or to somebody else. So most often, sometimes you're the only person they've ever shared things with, whether it's their feelings or about something that's happened to them. And it's so humbling and honoring to hold space for that. And you genuinely care about that person so much, even if you only see them for an hour a week or an hour every couple of months, and you think of them, but you can't, it's not like a friend where you could just, text them or call them up and say, hey, I'm thinking of you. How are you?
Yeah,
So it is nice to hear those kind of check-ins or updates.
definitely.
And like you said, the resiliency skills that they build.
Mm-hmm. In your opinion, do you feel like a certain population has a more of a resistance against attending therapy?
I'll say, so I really specialize in working with like high achievers, high performers, professional athletes, or business people. I see a lot of that. So yeah, I think in that realm, it can be really hard, but I'll say it is becoming so much more common across sports, across levels, across, CEOs and businesses. So that is becoming more, talked about. Again, it's often where it's like, how do I get over this obstacle, or goal setting, very solution kind of focused. And then that kind of older, maybe demographic still, I would say, like to kind of generalize, not everybody, but I was really blown away by those high schoolers. I work with a lot of teachers too. So just hearing about their conversations and that kind of normalization of what they're doing and kind of the curriculum in the schools, I'm actually quite impressed by. Obviously, there's a lot of unique struggles too and support there. And then just being a clinical supervisor of grad students and university students, I love how open they are about it. It's like almost, hey, I like your hair. Where do you get your hair done? They talk about, hey, you know what? You seem like you have it together. Where do you go to therapy? I'm looking now that I'm in this town for it. And I was like blown away by a few of them that kind of just talked about it that way.
Yeah. So definitely that older demographic you find that gets a little bit more challenging, and like the high achievers, because would you almost say with high achieving types of clients, it's like, okay, well, how do I win this session?
Yeah.
How do I like get an A from this hour? Or I've noticed that as well with some clients. They're like, well, how did I do today? Or, that kind of picking apart. And
Or like the one and done, like,
yeah,
okay, just tell me what to do or give me
yeah,
some tools and then I'm out of here.
yeah.
I don't want to keep coming back. Yeah.
I don't know if I want the journey. I just want the sprint. And I'm like,
Right.
we're not
Yeah.
sprinting, but we're
Yeah.
gonna have a journey.
Yeah.
For sure. And I also find that on occasion when I do see some couples, unfortunately, sometimes males do lag a little bit behind. They're like, I'll be here, but it wasn't my first choice. A little bit of that headstrong, like, let's just power through what we're experiencing in the couple versus accepting that support and letting people into that vulnerable romantic couples space too, I find is another one as well.
Yeah, definitely with couples. You're so right. I think like building that rapport, because it's a whole different dance. Like it's so fun. The energy of the room changes because there's three of you instead of just that one-on-one, unless maybe you do a little bit of, meeting with one couple and then one of the individuals and then one of the individual, building that rapport, or if you do it all together. But it's like gaining that rapport, that trust, making people feel safe. And it takes time. It's probably not going to happen in one session.
And I find it's funny because I've had some of those individual male usually come back and go, oh, I tried that thing and it actually helps. So I think you got me there. And they'll make a joke like, did you go to school for that? I'm like, unfortunately I did. But and they come back. And I think part of our jobs is, like, this sounds a little bit bad, but we have to be a salesperson to some extent. We do have to hook them a little bit to that process so that they feel like and are willing to, because sometimes there's that resistance to change, right? Not that we're just trying to sell you a therapy hour, but having that buy-in and like having that deep rapport and whatnot too.
Yeah, I think that's and we call it self-disclosure. That's like the therapeutic term for it that we use as therapists. And everyone's a little different of where their comfort level is of how much they self-disclose about themselves. But especially with couples, like I've been married, like we've been together for 10 years, and so I'll share, what my husband and I like this is how we approach it, or maybe this is something that we've sought help in, and just kind of normalize it. And I feel such a shift in that, especially with men, that, oh, I'm not the only one, or, oh, there's other people like that out there. And because it's often very common communication things or conflict resolution that even though we all speak English, we speak it a little bit differently. And so getting on the same playing field there.
Definitely that normalization and connection, right? And having them feel comfortable. But we go back to like that big question, like, can I go to therapy, or is therapy for me? What would you give it if you had to give it a yes or a no, what would it be? Like, could you blanket it for everyone?
Absolutely. I think I'm like so pro it because I have, there's some funny quotes out there. I follow like psychotherapy memes on social media, but oftentimes one popular quote is, I go to therapy to deal with people in my life who don't go to therapy. And that's a good kind of summary. But also, as we're becoming more, it's not mainstream by any means yet, but the stigma is lessening slightly. So, the world or culture, social media can tell us, I go to spin class, or I eat well, or I do self-care. That's my therapy. You drive past some, like liquor stores and they say wine is my therapy and it's cheaper than therapy or something like that. And I'm like, that's not a healthy way to so a resounding yes in my book. I think that therapy really can be for everyone. And like you said, it doesn't have to necessarily be just one traumatic event or a negative in your life. It could be strength based. It could be finding, what are your unique strengths? How could you come alive a little bit more in your life or add these skills to it? And it is so practical, like you said, a budget, or scheduling in things. Like we pull out calendars and write things down or make a vision board, and so it can look, there's no cookie cutter example for it there. It's so personal, and I do think it's for everyone.
Definitely, right. And I think part of our job is as well is to notice where people may be resistant. Like something common I hear is, I've always felt this way. I'm always going to be anxious, or I'm always going to struggle with my mood or whatnot. And just having them have that hopefulness that things can change.
Yeah, I remember I said that when I was in university. I remember it just like came out so organically. And I just said, oh, I'm just a naturally anxious person. And my counselor was the first person in my life to say, no, you're not. You're not created to be that way. And we can get skills in that. And that was huge for me. I was like a deer in headlights. At first, I was like, oh, wow. I felt like not reprimanded, but it was the first like healthy, kind of bump in that I had with, I don't have to subscribe to this narrative or keep replaying that over and over. I can change this.
Developing your ability to have like negative affect tolerance or positive affect tolerance, like that ability to be okay, to be calm, or that ability to be okay that you're not feeling okay, right?
What do you think? Do you think therapy is for everyone or certain people? What's your perspective?
It's interesting because like I don't think every person needs therapy, but I think everyone needs a form of self-development or a form of self-regulation, right? Because sometimes we maybe don't as much connect with like communicating with another person, but maybe we really connect well with exercise or art or other forms of expression. So I think it's open and available for everyone. Does everyone need it? No, right? Because sometimes we could just get very lucky in life and have a really good childhood experiences and feel really content, and we somehow pick up a lot of resiliency along the way. I think it's valuable for everyone and I think it's available for everyone, but does everyone need it? No, right? And it's not in a bad way that I say that. I say that I think everyone should also have the ability to make a proper informed choice of whether they want to attend therapy. And so that's why I think this podcast today is really helpful, is because we're trying to lessen the stigmas around it or the misconceptions, so that if you're saying no, you actually know what you're saying no to, versus like, do you want some broccoli? No, I hate broccoli. Have you ever tried it? It's like, no, but like, at least have you educated yourself of what broccoli is, you know?
And the benefits of it, and
Yes.
just having more of that context. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And just general mental health care strategies or tips, to know of them. Like, we don't learn that in school, but it would be so valuable because, again, we're human. We're all going to have ups and downs and experience these very real life emotions.
Definitely. And whether it's through a counseling hour, which would be wonderful, or reading
Yeah.
or learning in different methods and formats, right? So I think it's more about, is the person just open to it instead of shutting it down or falling down a path of misconception or stigma around what mental health care is or what it looks like. So in general, again, going back to our point, I think anything can be discussed within therapy. It's open to anyone. I think you should give it a try. And my biggest like ask of everyone is, if you attend a session just on a whim because you're like, no, I'm going to give it a try, and you don't connect with that therapist, please try again. That's one of my biggest pet peeves, are people like, I tried it once and I didn't like it. And it's like, well, did you give feedback to the therapist, or did you try again with a different therapist or different modality or different form, like equine therapy, art therapy, movement therapy, somatic, like it's endless, right? And so there's so many options within that.
Yeah. And I think that can be overwhelming for people. Like, if you're thinking about, okay, I think I'm going to try therapy. And then it's like, what kind? And you Google it. There's so many out there. And what do they all mean? This cognitive behavioral therapy. That sounds like big words. What does it mean? Demystifying it. But it is so true, because there's a lot of different approaches. There's a lot of different types of therapists, and there's a lot of different personalities. And that it's like this dance in the room when you're meeting with someone or online. And it really does matter how you connect with the therapist. That, in my opinion, that's the most important thing, even above the modality, the approach, the strategies used, is the right fit, the right connection, that you feel safe with your therapist, that you connect with them, you drive. That's so important.
Definitely that feeling that you get when you're communicating, you're like, oh, that person has empathy and understanding for me and knowledge that they're able to use to help direct me. Because as therapists, we're not going to tell you what to do. We're just going to kind of give you a bit of a guide or a direction for you, because you heal within yourself. Right. So
yeah, we don't give advice. That's sometimes when people come, especially my high achievers, they come in, tell me what to do. What's your opinion? What's your advice? And then I usually, kind of unravel that a little bit of, well, I'm not really in the business of giving advice, but I can go over some brainstorming ideas with you and help you develop these tools rather than me telling you. And that can be frustrating, because I remember saying those exact things. I'm wired that way. And I'm like, just tell me what to do. I just want to see you one time. I don't want to keep coming back. What's your advice? Like, you know, so I appreciate that it is a struggle, and I can feel the tension just in myself, like when I get there too of, oh, I just want to know what to do. Just tell me what to do. Don't just sit with me in this. But we don't just sit with people in uncomfortable emotions. We actually help you learn tools that you get to climb out of that too. So we don't do it for you, but we come alongside of you and we help give you these skills. So again, that you really can, like you said earlier, become your own therapist and don't need to come back to see us.
For sure. And I think that's where maybe this idea comes up like, oh, I'll go to counseling and they're going to tell me what to do because of this idea of a treatment plan. It's like, because there's a treatment plan and a lot of other health professionals, like maybe even a physiotherapist, right? Or occupational therapist, or even your doctor be like, do this, do this, do this, right? But we don't work in that way. It's not that we don't think about you outside of our therapy hour of like what we feel would be beneficial for you. It's more about like, we're going to try and help you to get there within your own self. And so I think therapy isn't for you if you feel like you just want us to tell you what to do. Maybe.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Maybe being open to that, seeing that a little bit differently.
And I think it's important because some of my clients, my just kind of my approach, I think how I benefited was I liked homework. Like I liked take home things where it wasn't just that 1 hour a week or every other week, but it was things that I could do at home, like in my real life that practice these skills. And so that's what I do. I give people real things that they could do in their real life, that it's not going to be read this book and do all these worksheets every single day, maybe if they're applicable to your life, but they're really life skills that you're implementing, or catching a negative thought and challenging it right away, or things like that, that fit into your real life. Apps, books, resources, podcasts, all sorts of those I'm big fans of, but it's so personalized. But I really like to give those types of, take home or homework or things like that. And I think that's where those, more advice or solution or goal oriented people really maybe can kind of fit with or identify with, because it's like, okay, at least I could do something. And yeah. What about you? What do you like to do?
I do definitely like to give the resources as well, but I phrase it as whether you do this or not does not determine your worthiness or how you show up in counseling, because my job is to meet you where you're at. And again, that's probably where like that idea comes up. Like, well, if I go to counseling, they're going to counsel me into what I should do. Right. And it's not really like that. It's just like, these are empirically validated resources that would be supportive to you if you would like to do them. Right. And so that's really, it's like a little bit of a grammatical dance, I think, sometimes when a client's like, what should I do? And it's like, well, what do you think you should do? But these are some ideas and suggestions that could be beneficial for you. Right. And so I think it's important that when you're coming to counseling and working with your counselor, like, what am I wanting to work on? And that may take a lot of time, and that's okay to figure out what you're wanting to work on, but knowing that you're not going to get like that direct answer.
Yeah. And oftentimes with those types of clients, or especially on those initial sessions or early on to build rapport, if they are coming in saying, I don't really know what I want to work on, I usually have, a list of questions that I usually go through that I've done throughout of just kind of help prodding or unpacking that a little bit. If people come in thinking, I don't really know what I want to work on, or, the one strategy is the miracle question. It's through solution focused therapy. But you know what, if you went to bed tonight, you woke up the next morning and your life was exactly how you wanted it to be, how would you know? Like, what would you be doing then, thinking about then, feeling then? What would other people notice about you then that's different than now? And sometimes that's good to get people thinking, or just kind of getting out of their own head or thinking outside the box of dreaming a little bit, adding that hope, kind of that growth mindset.
Definitely helping them to build that awareness, because a lot of times if we aren't aware of what's happening, then we won't know what we want to change.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And not that anything has to change, but like with that awareness, then becomes your opportunity to have informed consent of what you want to choose or not do. Right.
Yeah. Well, I think before we change anything, we have to be aware, like you said, like that first step really is just identifying, like getting a good baseline of where we're at, a lay of the land, identifying what, triggers us, whether it's this tuning into your thought patterns or where you feel it in your body. Is it around this certain place, around this certain person or types of people, and kind of becoming a student of yourself and getting curious, not in a condemning or judgmental way of, oh, I'm so tired lately, or I'm so lazy, but oh, I wonder why my body needs so much rest lately. How can I meet that need? And so it really is that, identifying, some challenging, some replacing or reframing, but it is a process. It's not just going to happen in that one session necessarily.
Definitely. If I had to make a checklist for clients, like if you want to go to therapy, buyer beware in a nice way. It would be buyer beware. You will develop some awareness inherently. There will be change of some sort, whether there's an actionable change that you are doing in your life, but you will change in your perspective at a minimum, or aware of that perspective, right? There will be communication, and we will communicate for a while, right? Like these are just some things that happen in therapy. I think individuals maybe don't really think about, like, or you will have to invest some time and energy into it, right? And it is a commitment in some way. And it isn't like something that fixes you. It's something that you will learn how to work within yourself. Right. So I think we could almost make a buyer beware checklist of like, these are the things that could happen in therapy. Are you okay with that? Because they're really wonderful.
I get this question sometimes. I'm whether it's a friend, so they couldn't necessarily, or, a family member, they can't come see me, but they're like, do you have any recommendations or where do I start? What would you encourage people? Like if they're thinking about counseling, they've never been, they don't know where to start. Maybe they don't want to ask anyone too close to them. What would you suggest?
If someone that I know has asked me personally, I would sometimes give a recommendation of a clinician if I feel like that clinician could be a really good fit for them. But if it's just for the general population, I would say I really actually like Psychology Today, its website, because it's really good at with their filters. Like you have so many filters that you can layer on for like cost, modality, like whether it's like online or in person, the type of therapy, if you want a specific type of gender or person to present to you as your clinician, the different modalities. So I think that's really great. And I think it's a bit of like a job interview, because you are, as a client, hiring someone to work with you. And so I'm like, I always say to people, like, don't hire the first person you meet, interview people, have those consult calls, and like really get to know what feels right for you. And a lot of clinicians are really open to those consult calls, so those are great. So Psychology Today. As a registered clinical counselor, the BCACC has a find a counselor tool. That one's also really great. And the reason I really like that one as well is because to be advertised on that page means that you have met the criteria and have been vetted by the British Columbia Association of Clinical Counselors. So those are my main two that I would say. Yeah, those are kind of my main two sources, I would say, for clients if they're looking for someone. But I do try, if someone I know personally has asked me, to try and find someone or support them in that process.
Definitely. And I second it. Psychology Today. Sometimes people have like the little intro videos that are like 30 seconds long that you can kind of get a taste of what they sound like, what they look like, that they're real people. And that can be really helpful. And again, most of us do those complimentary consultations, 10-minute video or phone meetings to kind of get a right fit, ask some questions. For most of us, our fees are on our websites right there, and how that works with your insurance. You just want to make sure what does your insurance cover? Because that's a big thing is cost for people. If you have extended benefits, you want to check that. If you and I are both registered clinical counselors, so if you have those benefit coverages, you'd want to check registered clinical counselor, RCC, clinical counseling, things like that on your insurance package. And then, yeah, Psychology Today is great because you can put in your zip code and you can find people close to you. So in British Columbia, for example, you could work with anyone in British Columbia online who's licensed here. But if you do want in person, then you can look up who's in your town or your area. And that can be a really useful tool too.
Yeah, definitely. Again, like those are really great options to use. And I do think like one of the reasons why there is some stigma around attending therapy is that like cost in some ways, or a lot of clients might find it really difficult to like pick up the phone and give a phone call or an email. Like that might be challenging in themselves. So like when you mentioned earlier, using like the Jane app and having online booking, I think that's also been really helpful with technology, because you don't always have to talk to someone to book a time and have that like, oh, does this time work kind of conversation. You just can book in that, maybe that consult or that first session to kind of get things going. So I think that also has been really helpful.
So true. Yeah. Remove as many barriers as you can. I love Gene app. I love the direct booking for that reason, that people can book the complimentary consultation or an office appointment or online counseling. It's so great. I love it.
Definitely.
What would you say are the most common things that people come to counseling for that you see?
Oh, goodness. I think that question just changes with each clinician depending on what you're focusing on. So I do a lot of the trauma work, the anxiety pieces, and the relationship stuff. And so this year I've been really focusing on the EMDR and the stuff that comes along from that because I'm pursuing more education around the EMDR. It really just depends. And I think it's also just like what type of individuals I attract. So I get a lot of the younger females, and I always joke that I'm not too old and things like that too. So I find that a lot of that is that anxiety, identity pieces, or relationship strain, or working through different challenges.
Yeah, definitely. I would say in my practice, definitely those things: anxiety, stress, depression, confidence, identity, again, more of those niches of sports performance, postpartum mental health, postpartum depression and anxiety. I see a lot of as a mom, as a clinical supervisor. So I have 10 interns. And I would say the most common things that we see, anxiety, stress, depression, relationship stuff, whether it's couples or just boundaries or relationship issues in your own life. We see so much of that trauma. And it's just such a variety of what people come with. Like there's no, oh, if you're experiencing this, then you should go to this therapy. Even trauma, like you said, there's different avenues of trauma. And I love the EMDR one because it's, so trendy right now. You did such a great job on the podcast talking about it and educating people that, to have that service, I think is huge. And these, the different treatment plans, quote unquote, for different issues, quote unquote, anxiety or depression, trauma. There's a lot of different ways to kind of walk with someone through that or treat it, quote unquote.
Whatever you're feeling, it's welcome in therapy.
Yeah. Amen. Yeah.
Well, I think we've done such a wonderful job today in terms of like demystifying some things, kind of broadening the topic around like the stigmas, what's welcome in counseling, what does the counseling hour kind of entail, what would maybe happen as a result of going to counseling. So, and like the different ways to find a counselor. So I really appreciate all of that today, Barb. That was really wonderful.
Oh, that was so fun. Thanks, Hailey.